Hi, parents. My name is Megan Hargrave. I am a literacy coach and consultant who has the privilege to work with the teachers that support your students. I am going to talk to you a little bit today about the writing process. I'm sure it's something that you've heard before. You've either heard your child talk about it or heard their teacher talk about it. And the writing process, quite frankly, is just a series of steps that writers follow when they had to produce something. And if you think about it, it's a process that you follow day in and day out. When you are going to write an email back to a boss who posed a question, you're probably going to generate ideas, and then you're going to draft an email, and then you might make some revisions. Of course, you'll edit that, and then at some point you make it public. Or if you're writing a speech that you have to give or a presentation, you generate ideas, you get something down on the page, you make some revisions, you look for final edits, and then you make it public. The writing process, though, it's something that your students are following in school in writing workshop, is not a standalone just for writing workshop. It's something that will help them as writers in the world. And so with that said, I just want to talk to you really quick about the writing process and what you might expect from a writing unit that your child is doing in school. And the first thing that happens for any writer is that they need to think of ideas. And when they think of ideas, they don't just generate ideas. Here's what I want to write about, but they do some practice, and maybe they do some rehearsal on the page, or maybe they try speaking it. They do some practice of those ideas to figure out if the idea is really going to work, or is that what they really want to say? And then at some point, after generating ideas and coming up with a powerful thing that they want to write about, they draft. And often in their classroom, drafting happens fast and furiously. Drafting is just getting the bones of their work down on the page. It's getting that initial go at their writing written down so that they have something to work with. The key with drafting is that you don't want it to take weeks or months for your student. The more brief that you can keep drafting, the more that students will be willing to revise. What happens a lot during the writing process is kids draft for a couple weeks, and then their teachers say revise, and they say, no, I'm done. I've spent too long on this. And so we really encourage writers to keep that drafting short and sweet, because the bulk of their writing development and their learning is really going to happen in revision. And revision is when you literally put on a pair of glasses and you look at your draft and you have a new vision for it. Revision, just like you would reheat pizza, you would heat it up again. Revision is to see something again. And so in revision, this is where you're teaching kids to go back and angle your writing to reach a different audience, or you're teaching them to elaborate in different ways, or you're teaching them to incorporate more evidence. But revision leads to big changes, and revision isn't easy. A lot of times revision leads writing to feel a little bit more awkward and not as good as maybe their initial draft, but revision is when your writers are really going to outgrow themselves. And then from there, there's a difference between revision and editing. Editing is when I'm reading back through my writing and I'm making little changes that make a big difference, but it's not the knock out the wall type of changes. It's more of, let me just hang up a new painting. So it's thinking about, this is big, major changes. And this is really looking at the aesthetics of your writing, thinking about your spelling and your punctuation. And quite frankly, one of the things that I encourage teachers to think about and kids to think about is that editing should always be happening. Editing is something that everybody does, all people do after they write something. It's always good to go back and do an edit of that. And then at some point, the unit's going to end and they're going to move into publication. And I like to use the word publication here instead of publishing, or to even think, sometimes they'll write celebration. But when I look at the word publication, I look at the beginning part. It says public. And I remind writers that the final stage of the writing process is to hit send or give the speech, and it won't be perfect. It won't be, you could always work on something to make it better, but it's time to make it public. And then you might start the process all over again. So when you hear writers talking about the writing process, or teachers talking about the writing process, when you hear them mentioning things from generating ideas to drafting to revision to editing to publication, I hope that this gives you some thinking around what those different phases of the process mean and why this is such an essential part of the writing instruction. Thanks, parents.